Have you ever stopped to wonder why fear feels so automatic, so inescapable? We usually treat it like it's a psychological problem, right? Just an emotional reaction to what's going on around us. But what if it's something else? What if fear isn't just an emotion, but a law, an invisible spiritual principle that got switched on a long, long time ago? To really get our heads around this, we have to go back, way back, to the beginning. I mean, it's a huge question, isn't it? Where did fear even come from? It's this universal human experience, but was it always here? To find the real answer, we have to look at the very first time this powerful, crippling force ever stepped onto the scene in the human story. And there it is, the first time the word afraid is ever recorded. It's a shocking moment when you really think about it. Adam, a man who literally walked with God in perfect peace, is suddenly hiding. Why? What on earth changed? The answer he gives, well, that's the key to unlocking the entire mystery of fear. To really feel the weight of what was lost in that one moment, we have to first try and picture the world as it was meant to be. A world that was in a state of perfect alignment. A world totally, completely without fear. Just try to imagine that for a second. A state of being where you are, naked and totally unashamed, perfectly at peace, zero anxiety. This was the original design. See, fear was not a factory setting for humanity. It was an intrusion. It was a virus in the system that was never supposed to be part of our experience. So, how did it get in? This is where everything clicks into place. Fear wasn't some punishment that was handed down from on high. No, it was an automatic consequence. A spiritual law was activated the very second humanity stepped out of alignment. Let that just sink in for a minute. Fear wasn't just some new bad feeling Adam had. It was a legal system, a spiritual law that was flipped on like a light switch. Before God even spoke a single word of judgment, Adam was already trembling. Why? Because the law had already taken effect. This principle has a name. It's called the law of sin and death. And you have to understand, it operates with the same kind of impartiality as a law of physics. It is just as real and just as automatic as gravity. It doesn't need someone to push it along. It enforces itself. So what's the real difference here? Well, think of it like this. A command is a rule you can choose to follow or break. But a spiritual law, that's a principle that enforces itself. When Adam disobeyed, he didn't just break a rule. He triggered a self-enforcing system of consequences. The fallout was baked right in. So how does this law actually work? How does it operate? The best way to understand it is to think of it as a kind of spiritual physics. There are a few really powerful analogies that can help make this invisible principle feel a lot more tangible and real. First, let's talk about gravity. Disobedience literally dislocates the soul from its proper place in the divine order. And just like a rock that you let go of has absolutely no choice but to fall, a soul that's been disconnected from its source of peace has no choice but to collapse into a state of fear. It's an automatic downward pull. Okay, here's another way to see it. Think of a vacuum. You know how they say nature abhors a vacuum? Well, so does the spiritual realm. Fear is simply the spiritual vacuum that rushes in to fill the space that gets left behind when perfect love, which is always expressed as perfect obedience, leaves the heart. Or what about a live wire? This one really hits home. If you touch a live wire, you don't have to wait around for a judge to sentence you to be electrocuted, right? Of course not. The consequence is built directly into the act. The current enforces itself. And in the same way, the moment you step out of obedience, fear enforces its own judgment automatically. But listen, this is not where the story ends, and thank God for that, because if it were, it would be a story of complete and utter despair. The incredible news is that the law that brought fear into the world is not the final or the most powerful law in the universe. Not even close. There is a higher law. The Apostle Paul talks all about this in Romans 8. He literally pits two laws against each other. You have the law of sin and death, which automatically enforces condemnation and fear, and then you have the law of the Spirit of life, which grants total freedom in Christ Jesus. One is a law of collapse, the other is a law of freedom. So how does this higher law work? Well, remember our gravity analogy? Now think about the law of aerodynamics, the law of lift. An airplane doesn't defy or get rid of gravity. It engages a higher law that literally overcomes the pull of gravity. It's the same thing here. The law of the spirit of life doesn't erase the law of sin and death, it just overrides it. And this creates the most profound reversal imaginable. When a believer walks in alignment with God's spirit, that is, in obedience, fear loses its legal right to mess with you. Not because fear has disappeared from the world, but because your obedience disables its access to you. The very same justice system of heaven that once had to condemn you now becomes your defense. Okay, so what does this mean for us, for you and me today? How do we actually live this out? How do we apply this incredible truth and walk the practical path back to a life without fear? How do we restore that divine order in our own lives? All right, here's the strategy. It's simple. First, stop fighting fear like it's just a bad feeling. You can't win an emotional fight against a legal problem. It just doesn't work. Second, you have to fix it legally. You go to the root cause, which is misalignment. And how do you do that? That's the third step. You return to obedience. When you restore that alignment, the alarm system of fear just naturally goes silent. Please, hear this. This is so important. Fear was never, ever meant to be part of your design. It is not your personality type. It is not a permanent fixture of who you are. It is a trespasser. It's an alien system that has absolutely no legal right to dominate you when you are walking in the light. You know, this verse is often read like it's just beautiful poetry. But now we can see it as spiritual physics. Perfect love, which is expressed as perfect obedience to God, legally and powerfully, expels fear. It doesn't just soothe it, it casts it out. So here's the bottom line. Fear got its legal entry into our world through a law that was activated by disobedience. But a higher law, the law of love expressed through Christ, has been put into place. And that higher law doesn't just challenge fear, it completely overrides it. So the question that's left for every single one of us is, which law are we going to choose to live under?